Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's conversation. It is part 2 in a 2-part series titled When ADHD Triggers Emotional Outbursts, Scripts for Your Flashpoints. Leading today's presentation is good friend of ADDitude, Dr. Sharon Saline. Dr. Saline is a clinical psychologist and author of the award-winning book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, working together to empower kids for success in school and life, and the ADHD Solution Deck. She specializes in working with children, teens, emerging adults, and families living with ADHD, as well as anxiety, learning disabilities, autism, twice exceptionality, and other mental health issues. Her unique perspective as a sibling in an ADHD home, combined with decades of experience as a clinical psychologist and educator, clinician, and consultant, assists her in guiding families and adults toward effective communication and closer connections. Dr. Saline lectures and facilitates workshops internationally on topics such as understanding ADHD, executive functioning, anxiety, motivation, different kinds of learners, and the teen brain. She's a regular contributor here at ADDitude and also for psychologytoday.com. She's a featured expert on mass appeal, WWLP TV, and a part-time lecturer at the Smith School for Social Work. Her writing has been featured in MSN, the Psychotherapy Networker, Smith College Studies in Social Work, Attention Magazine, Psych Central, Inquirer.com, all over ADDitude. And you can learn more about her at www.drsharonsaline.com. We received more than 1,000 questions and comments ahead of today's webinar. Some of those came in during part 1 of this series. So if you're listening and you missed part 1 or you would like a refresher, I highly recommend going back and listening to that webinar. It is ADHD Experts podcast episode number 426, and we have actually linked it from the ADDitudeMag.com homepage right now. So you can find it there as well. Go back and listen to it another time. You don't need it for today's conversation, but it is chock full of really great insight and advice. Today, we will be focusing on addressing all of your questions about intense emotions and how to manage them. So Sharon is going to guide us through the challenges of emotional dysregulation, offer us ideas and tools to help us avoid doing or saying things we might later regret. We're going to work on getting a hold of our emotional reactions with less stress and more compassion. So that is our mission for today. And we will begin with just a little level setting. We're going to ask a poll question for our live audience. We would like to know, what are your emotional triggers? Just please select your answers, and you can comment in the text box if you want to tell us more. And then you'll see the results when you submit your response, and we'll go over them at the end. So I'll point out while you do that you can submit questions anytime during the live event. You can also download the slides by clicking on the event resources section in the webinar screen. If you're interested in the certificate of attendance, just look for those instructions in an email about an hour after we wrap up. And we will also have a transcript available in the coming week. So if you are listening in replay or podcast mode, you're going to visit ADDitudeMag.com and search for podcast number 444. I feel like that's a lucky number to access the slides, webinar replay, certificate of attendance, and all that other good stuff. If you support the work we're doing here at ADDitude, we encourage you to visit ADDitudeMag.com/subscribe and sign up for ADDitude Magazine to share with your family, a teacher, a loved one, anyone who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Finally, last item, we would like to thank our sponsor for today's webinar. It is Play Attention. Improve executive function and self-regulation. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found play attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control of ADHD students. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs are available. You can call 828-676-2240 or click the link on your screen to schedule a free one-on-one consultation. You can also visit playattention.com to learn more. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting these free webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Okay, all that's out of the way. Now I can formally welcome Sharon. Thank you so much for being here and for leading part 2 of this discussion on flashpoints.
Thank you so much for having me, for that lovely introduction. And it is wonderful to be here, as always. I'd like to start by reviewing some of the common themes that we saw in the questions from the last webinar. And those were triggers and causes of reactivity, calming techniques for emotional regulation, workplace and relationship issues, and rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Next slide, please. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm bringing up some of the slides that may look a little familiar from last time, and then the questions that are related to them, because some of you may or may not have attended, my webinar in October. So all of us know what it's like when the switch flips and suddenly there's this volcano of anger and negative emotions that erupts. And before you know what's happening, you might say or do things that you'll surely regret later, but can't stop. And this is particularly true for kids and adults with ADHD, and also very true for women who are going through perimenopause. In fact, many years ago, I saw Russell Barkley speak out here in Western Mass, and he said going through perimenopause was actually like having ADHD in terms of the changes, the chemical changes that are happening in the brain, which made me laugh a lot at the time because that was very true, sadly. True for me. So relationships and school and work can be all affected by emotional dysregulation. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about why this occurs, but mostly about what you can do differently. So now the flip side of the emotional intensity and outbursts that come with living with ADHD is a natural excitement for things, an enthusiasm, passion. Some people are extroverted, some people are introverted, but there are things that they love, they really love. And so when we look at this as two sides of the same coin, and this is what actually happens in our brains, which I'll show you in a minute, it's like the energy can be transformed. It can be transformed from, ugh, this is so horrible, nothing's going right, I'm so frustrated, to, let me consider what could go right instead of focusing on what could go wrong or what is going wrong. So today we're going to look at how to identify some of these triggers, a little teeny bit about the biology of activation, and create strategies in advance for dealing with these eruptions, these intense feelings that include body-based awareness, collaboration, and compassion for each other. So some of the reactivity habits that we see are things like denial, blame, attacking, contempt, catastrophizing, even escalating things, provocations. And what we want to do instead of react is to learn how to respond, to consciously create habits of response. So responsive habits include self-awareness about biological signals related to those triggers, that you're becoming dysregulated and choosing a soother or a break instead versus an intensifier response. taking time to settle, owning your part, listening and seeking ways to make amends and move forward. So when we deny, when we blame, when we are defensive, we're just throwing fuel on a growing fire that's happening between you and either an issue that's going on for you in your life or with another person. So how does the ADHD anger connection work? And this would be also true for the ADHD anxiety connection or the ADHD intense sadness connection. So what happens is that we perceive sensory information through our 5 senses, and it goes through the thalamus in the brain, and then to the thinking brain or the emotional brain, depending on what the thalamus perceives. If a threat is perceived, then the thalamus will send if the sensory information contains things that could be threatening, the amygdala will perceive this danger and then move into fight, flight, or freeze response before the prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning skills, can overrule it. So what happens is, which, we get this amygdala hijack that Danielle Siegel talks about, or what I like to call the amygdala takeover. It sets off a release of stress hormones, adrenaline, which we also know as epinephrine, and cortisol. And this pattern takes about 6 seconds, that release of those stress hormones. Interestingly, it takes the body 20 minutes to recover from the massive amounts of signals it's getting to, tense up their muscles, to start perspiring, to cool the body down, to increase heart rate, to increase blood flow, to slow down digestion. So maybe you feel a little nauseated or you have to go to the bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. Many of the threats that we face today, not all, but many, are more symbolic than the physical ones our brains evolved to deal with. So this means that for people with ADHD who often have working memory challenges, these working memory challenges reduce our capacity for emotional regulation. They're linked. People with stronger working memory are better at managing and controlling their emotional reactions. When the prefrontal cortex goes offline, emotions are ruling the brain. So I like to think of it like, I think of it as a VW bug, but you could think of it as a Tesla. In the very back, in the trunk, back here is our physiological brain, our reptilian brain, and that's making sure we're breathing and there's blood flowing, etc. In the middle of the brain is our emotional brain. That's where our limbic system is. It's also can be the seat of memory, and on the left side, language. And then in the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex is where our executive functions are. It's the human part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain. And so when the prefrontal cortex goes offline because emotions, the amygdala is now coming out of the back seat of the car where it really should live, in the middle of the brain, and basically elbowing the prefrontal cortex away from driving, and it starts to drive you everywhere, all in a crazy pattern. There's limited verbal and behavioral impulse control. So the amygdala cannot distinguish between physical and emotional threats. So persistent stress at work, at home, or at school can trigger the amygdala to automatically respond before your frontal lobes can provide any logical reasoning to that situation. And this is very important to understand. So the next question would be, next slide, please. The question, so there were some questions related to emotional regulation. So the first question is, how can I recognize my triggers? Someone asked, is the ABC, antecedent behavior consequence format, useful? I believe that the best way that you can recognize your triggers is connecting the triggers to a physiological response in your body. And we all have this. So take a minute and think about it. Does your stomach, do you get a little knot in your stomach? Do you get a little tightness in your chest? Are you gripping your jaw? Maybe you're perspiring a little bit. So we want to start to recognize that there's a physiological change first and foremost, because that is the sign that something is off. That is the sign that we need to pay attention, that we are moving into there's a disturbance somewhere in our field that could then lead us to not just activation, but being on high alert. Question, what about when you shut down and struggle to articulate that you need a moment? So this is a really great question, because what happens in fight, flight, or freeze sometimes is freeze. And interestingly, yesterday I was doing a session with a client who has a lot of social anxiety and very low self-esteem. And we were talking about the fact that she's really struggling to look for a job. And it was not an in-person session because of the weather. And I could see this freeze reaction. It was like a deer in headlights. And there was a way that she had just checked out. And I said, what's happening? Where are you? And she said, I don't know. I can't talk and I can't remember anything that you're saying. And I said, okay, let's start with breathing. And she just started to cry. She was having so much anxiety that she would do the wrong thing in writing this follow-up email that she shut down. So we want to recognize when we're activated, when we're triggered, and that we might need something to do to slow the process down. I personally don't like being told to calm down. Someone asked, what do you say instead of calm down is the next question, right? So what we want to do is we have to slow down. We need to slow the reactivity. So what's going to help you slow down? Or let's take a minute and call a pause here. You're kind of revving up, and I really would appreciate it as your partner if we could just slow it down a little bit, because people can understand slowing down or settling a bit, but calming. When you tell someone who's your partner to calm down, there's a power dynamic that's implied. I, partner, am calm and have everything under control, and you, person with ADHD, are whacked. And that is not going to bode well for a productive conversation or working together or being able to act as a team. And the final question is, how do I appropriately handle emotional, angry, frustrated outbursts of ADHD, especially when my meds are starting to wear off? So when people who take stimulants transition off their medication, and this is particularly true for kids and sometimes for adults, we call this the witching hour. So it's like the medication is wearing off, the brain is refocusing and processing the sort of dregs of what's left, and there can be a need to restabilize. So we want to plan in advance for those moments. That those are times that are not good times, maybe to have a sit-down meeting with your boss. Or those are times where you're not going to try to correct your child's behavior or give them things that they really don't like doing, because their ability to sort of wrangle themselves and apply themselves at that moment isn't really going to be super successful. They need a little time to sort of make the transition into the next phase, and to talk in a calm moment about what sorts of things you can do during those transitions that will help soothe and settle them. Next slide, please. So I want to say something about ADHD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which I'm going to call RSD, and emotional reactivity. Many people with ADHD also have rejection sensitivity. And this is a common co-occurring condition. I know that Dr. Dodson has spoken about this on ADDitude. It's not a formal diagnostic category. It refers to intense feelings related to the belief that you've let other people down, embarrassed yourself, failed at something, or made a serious, unfixable mistake. And as a result, people will pull back their love or respect or their support. RSD causes extreme emotional pain that can plague both children and adults, even when no actual rejection has taken place. So it is deeply connected to social anxiety, because social anxiety is related to a core belief of I'm not good enough, and a fear that people are judging you in a particular way, that they're thinking these negative thoughts that you've created in your head that you're now projecting onto them. So people with RSD struggle to let go of past hurts and experience heightened emotional sensitivity. They may hold on to unkind words or actions for months or years. And it's especially tough for these people to recover from personal criticism or rejection. And living in this kind of one-down position will intensify their feelings and exacerbate shame. Next slide, please. So what are some techniques for managing RSD? So we want to consistently nurture your strengths and focus as much as possible on what you love to do and you do well. Pay attention to your positive efforts. Write down those 3 good things or good enough things before you go to bed, or share, a happy and a crappy at the dinner table with your family, or a rose and a thorn, or a high and a low. We want to really nurture maybe 2 highs and a low, so to start to shift the perspective to what actually is working. Practice taking a pause before responding to a question by saying, wow, that's really a good question. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Or that's a good piece of feedback, because otherwise you're going to get kind of sucked in to a dynamic that could be hurtful to you, and one in which you may not be responding in the way that you would like. And you want to check things out before coming to a conclusion. Maybe run something by someone else, a friend, a partner, a parent, if you're watching and you're a teen or emerging adult, someone whose in advice you really value. Maybe it could be a therapist or a coach, someone who can help you take some perspective. You want to quit taking things personally. A lot of times we take things personally that aren't about us. I was just reading about Lisa Damour's new book, and in her book she talks about, why living with teens can be so challenging, because they're in the externalization business. They project things onto you. They'll come dump their whole set of worries and concerns. In my house, it was always at 10 o'clock at night. And then they'll go away feeling much better, and then you feel bad. I personally call this the import-export business. They export and you import. And so what happens for people who have RSD is they are constantly living in the import business. So they're taking things on that may not actually refer to them or be about them. So, in any kind of situation, as my dad would say, there's 3 sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And, we can never get to objective truth because it's just not possible, but we want to make room for both sides of the story. And a lot of times people with RSD are only focused on what they've done wrong. They can't even imagine that there's another side. Use the STAR plan. We're going to talk about that in a minute, which is stop, think, act, and recover. So that you have prearranged tools like time aparts, relaxation techniques, or other healthy self-soothing activities when you're feeling these intense emotions. Go for a run, listen to music, talk with a friend, maybe do some knitting or cooking or whatever it is you like. What often happens for people is they drop into this shame spiral. They're unable to forgive themselves for whatever happened, and it's much easier for them to forgive others. So we want to practice self-compassion. So you want to talk to yourself and treat yourself the way you would talk to and treat a 3rd grader with a skin knee, or if your dog got his foot caught in a trap. We don't talk to ourselves that way so much of the time, and this is particularly true for women. And so we want to come up with some statements like, I'm stronger than I think, or I'm sensitive, and that's one of my better traits, something like that. Next slide, please. So we're going to improve self-regulation which is related, of course, to RSD, with what's called metacognition. So metacognition is the last of the executive functioning skills to coalesce in neurotypical brains around 25 and around 28 in people with ADHD. And metacognitive thinking is a powerful tool that helps you acknowledge problems without succumbing to a failure mentality or giving up. It's a way to focus on continued learning and improving efficiency in problem solving and identifying tools and resources. It's a process related to self-awareness, and it's considered a key executive functioning skill because it governs behavioral output and is tied to emotional control. So we want to be able to develop this self-awareness and build self-awareness in our kids from early on by asking questions like, how do I think I'm doing? What's helped me before that I could apply to this situation? What is the impact of my words or behaviors on others? What are their faces or bodies showing me? We want to understand how we are in relation to others and build that skill. So instead of asking, why can't I do this differently, we want to ask, how can I do this differently? And what support do I need to make this happen? So here are some questions, next slide, related to RSD and metacognition. One person asked, what are some strategies for managing RSD for myself and my teen daughter? So it is, because ADHD is highly inheritable, almost, somewhere between 45 and 50% of 55%, so around 50% of adults with ADHD have at least one child with ADHD. Strategies for managing RSD with a teen daughter who also has RSD, I think would best be started with a collaborative conversation. Like, hey, I'm sensitive to some of the things you say to me, and I notice, and you're sensitive to some of the things I say to you, and sometimes I'm sensitive to things other people say to me, like my sister or such and such a friend, and does this happen to you, and who does it happen with? Or observe that it happens with so-and-so. So what could we do that would sit down to help us in these moments? And then we're going to go through some of the things that I just had on the previous slide. What are ways that you can manage RSD? You have to really counter the negative thinking, the shame spiral, that it's all my fault. No one's ever going to like me ever again, with a actually more realistic and helpful part of yourself. You might want to create a name for that part of yourself in contradiction to that gremlin who's eating away at your self-esteem. But you want to be able to have some go-to phrases. You want to be able to have some go-to self-soothers. So when I'm feeling sensitive or when I'm feeling bad about what someone said to me, I'm going to try to do this to shift my mood, or I'm going to talk to so-and-so. So we want to have some self-soothing phrases and some self-soothing activities. And then we want to have someone where we could check something out. Okay. Someone told me this. I'm feeling pretty devastated. I know I'm overreacting. What are some other options for a more balanced response? The next question, how can I nurture radical self-acceptance and encourage it as a daily default to help myself? So this is also a great question. As I said, we often are very mean to ourselves. We have a voice in our heads. It can be your gremlin. It could be, one of my clients calls it Stupid Steve. Some part of yourself that is just kind of beats you up. And it beats up this other part of yourself that is, smart and creative and loyal and a good friend. And so what we want to do is to, strengthen that other part of yourself and really kind of take away some of the power of that negative voice. And so radical self-acceptance is being able to say to yourself, yes, I'm not good with time management. So I'm using some tools to help me, and I'm asking for some positive feedback from my colleagues when they notice I get to work within 15 minutes of when I should, because that's progress for me as opposed to 30 or 35. So we really want to be able to have some structures that we put in place. So one is forgiving yourself for your humanness. We all have warts. We all stumble. I struggle so much with emotional regulation with one of my children, and I still struggle sometimes. I have very intense feelings, and I wish I didn't. I wish I had a brain that could be more less reactive when I get feedback from a colleague that they're doing something and I wasn't included, instead of, having a little pouting session, which I'm not proud to say, but sometimes I do that. And, that's something that I need to work on. And I was talking about it with a friend of mine who also has ADHD. And he said, all you need to say is, you know what, this was a great thing. The next time you're considering doing something, would you be willing to reach out to me? I would love to participate. And I loved it because he flipped it on its head. And I was like, oh my God, you're so right. That's a much better way to deal with it. So we want to nurture our self-acceptance by having allies who help us encourage the parts of ourselves that are different coping strategies. We want to practice metacognition and teach it to your kids through the act of just developing self-awareness. How is it going using this? What could you do differently? Now if you think about it, what would you have liked to have said in this situation instead of what you did? So these are things that we want to think about for ourselves and with our kids. I like to encourage take back of the day, which gives kids an opportunity to say, whoops, I shouldn't have said that, and to take it back. And it can give you the same option. So you take it back as instead of holding on to it for too long. And then that develops an awareness of, wow, maybe that wasn't the best response for all of us. It wasn't effective. It wasn't actually true to who I am, etc. Next slide, please. So I talked earlier about my STAR approach. And so in my book, I talk about the 5 C's of ADHD parenting. I kind of think it's the 5 C's of living well with ADHD, which is practicing self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. So our goal with these intense feelings is to slow things down. So that's a stop. You're going to talk in advance about what your time apart is going to be, what activities might be available. Some families I work with go to the dollar store and create a calm me down box with special things that only come for this time apart. Some families make a list. You can take the dog for a walk. Maybe you want to cuddle with the cat. Maybe you want to go into one of my clients liked to go, she had a bed that was like off the ground this much. She liked to go under her bed, turn on her special flashlight and read to settle herself. So what are you going to do during this stop? And how are you going to call the stop? Like, what are the signs that you're becoming dysregulated to do that? And again, you remember that the amount of time needed for the pause to recenter is probably a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes. And for parents of younger kids, that might mean you doing something with them, playing cards, reading a story, maybe shooting some hoops in your backyard, whatever it is, because they may not be able to slow themselves down on their own. Thinking is when you talk about the situation calmly afterwards without going into why did you do this and what could you have done instead. There's no teaching. It's just a review of what happened. It's an observation from each of you about what occurred. And you're going to avoid blame and analysis. So you're going to say things like, I hear, I noticed, tell me more, I'm listening, or use basic reflecting statements. What I heard you say is this. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? And then during this thinking time, you're going to really sort of brainstorm a little bit, like, what are the next right things we can do? What could we to move forward? How are we going to move forward from this? And acting is doing one of those things. So you can brainstorm 3 things and choose one. This is really helpful because you've explored something to do and then you're keeping it simple. And then you're going to recover. You're going to allow time to pass and delay any teaching, you know, for as much as several hours, a couple hours, till the next day. You know, a lot of times parents feel like they have to give the teaching at the moment or their kids aren't going to remember. That's actually not necessarily true. Your kids might still be somewhat dysregulated and they may not be wanting to go into that anymore. So having some space between an incident and when you're going to talk to them about the incident or how to make different choices can be really useful. Next slide, please. So I received some questions related to the STAR method. One is, how long do you recommend pausing when using the STAR method? I just answered that question, actually. So, you know, that depends on the age of your child or what you know about yourself. But I would say somewhere between, for young children, you know, basically 4, 5, 6, and 7, you know, maybe it's just 10 minutes, maybe it's 15. For older kids, I would say somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes, particularly for teens who can get really riled up, not just because of all the hormones and changes that are going on, but because they have difficulty with emotional control and they might be feeling a lot of pressure around being a teenager. So we want to give enough time for that to occur, and you're going to agree on that in advance. Is it really possible to control emotions when so intense and spontaneous? Yes, it is, and it is, excuse my language, damn hard. It is really hard to do. So that stop, that pause, you need to know what that is for yourself and to have a go-to that you don't have to think about. So for me, when I'm feeling activated like that, I have 2 go-tos. One, I go straight to the bathroom because everybody has to go to the bathroom, and that's usually a private thing. Other people don't come into the bathroom when you do it. And I might just wash my hands or look in the mirror or just, you know, close the lid of the toilet and sit down and be like, okay, let's do some breathing. What's really going on? Why are you so activated? What can be the next thing that you could do? And even if there's chaos on the other side, you have to center yourself using whatever strategies work for you. Sometimes my second go-to might be stepping outside to breathe some fresh air, walking down the block, drinking a glass of water. Again, you need to sort of put these on your phone so you have something that you can go to. Oh, right, I don't remember what to do and I'm very upset, so I'm going to go to my thing, my note, upset tools, or whatever you want to call it. Or I have a calm me down, you can call it for yourself, of course, calm me down playlist. So let me listen to one of those songs that's going to help me let it out. And 3, can you use this at work? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can use it both as a manager and you can both use it for yourself to take that pause, to give yourself time to think, figure out what the next right thing is and do it. And then allow time to pass before you attempt to process it. And I would suggest that you find someone in your life who you can process it with rather than doing this on your own, because you could easily get into, a take it personally situation, and Q-tip could be helpful. Okay, so next slide, please. So those are the slides that I've prepared for today. I'd like you just to close your eyes for a minute and take a deep breath in through your nose, down, all the way through your belly, into your legs and your toes, and give a big exhale. Maybe make a noise on the exhale like, huh. And do that one more time. Breathe in all the way down. And let go of the air with a sigh. What is one thing that I've talked about today so far, and we're only halfway through, that you would like to try? And I want you to write this down, please. There is a new handout that I've created for you for this part 2 session, and it's called Moving Past No with a Pause program. And a lot of times it's for parents, but it's also for people when you're saying no a lot. What can you do to help you move past no? So if you want to take a minute and copy that link from your screen and put it up in your search engine, you can get this for you, and I think you'll find the tool very helpful. All right, Annie, let's go to our live questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Oh my goodness. So many great tips and tools and strategies. We also have quite a few very thoughtful questions. And I will just quickly, before we get going, thank our sponsor one more time, Play Attention. Thank you for sponsoring today's webinar. I wanted to mention that, we asked about what are your emotional triggers at the outset of today's session. And they are really quite even in their responses. I will say that the most common one is overwhelm.
Yes.
Feeling the need or that you're being asked to do too much all at once. This one hits home for me for sure. And right behind that was rejection sensitive dysphoria, which you covered in depth. And I thought it was quite interesting that the third and fourth are interpersonal conflict. There were a lot of mentions in the comments about feeling misunderstood or unclear communication, especially at work, being a trigger, an emotional trigger. And number 4 was disrespect. And it doesn't say here specifically, but we have a lot of questions that came in on that topic from parents who feel their own emotional triggers being pulled when their child is having a hard time, and specifically when their child is swearing at them or being otherwise disrespectful. And you gave us a few tools for removing ourselves from the situation. But that is a very big question here today. I'm wondering if you can address that, how you would advise parents to react when their child is using behavior that is hurtful and that they know is not okay.
Right. These are fantastic. These are two actually really, this is a great question. What am I trying to say? Let's deal with the overwhelm first, because I believe that the overwhelm and the disrespect and how to respond to it are connected. So when we feel overwhelmed because we've either committed to doing too many things or there's too much, stimulation in our environment, there's a way that we shut down. I call it overwhelm freeze. And you're not able to access your understanding of how to deal in these situations learned from previous experiences. You can't sort of think on your feet. There's a kind of a shutdown that you experience. And this frequently emerges for people with ADHD who have a grand appetite. When you might be someone who likes to try a lot of different things or do many things simultaneously. Whether or not you have ADHD, you could get overwhelmed. I think that a lot of us feel like our capacity of doing things is greater because we have all of this technology, when really our brains are frequently very overwhelmed and need some time to process. In relationships, what happens is that when people are very angry at you, whether it's a partner or a child, whatever your level of comfort is with conflict is tested. So if you came from a family where people did not argue, and you live in a family where people argue, you might be missing some some fundamental tools on how to respond. You may just kind of shut down and give in, or you might come from a family where there was conflict and you fight back, or you may come from the first family and still fight back. So, we want to really sort of understand how we respond when we're overwhelmed, and to connect it to these moments when our children are very dysregulated and yelling at us or cursing at us. Or in my family, eye rolling was something that really triggered my husband and was a big no-no. So, when kids are dysregulated, they are uncomfortable. It's not comfortable for anyone to be like that. And I would ask or say, that 9 times out of 10, kids feel a level of discomfort or regret about how they've acted after that. They may feel justified in their beliefs, but they may also feel like, it was okay that I did that because they deserved it. So I think that it's important to figure out in a calm moment, how are you going to respond when things start to escalate? Because it's during these escalations that people say and do things that they regret, but that also feel that can be lasting hurts. One of the things that I've learned is that when parents are yelling at their children, and I have actually, to be honest, learned this from my own parenting failures. When I lost it with my second child, they felt abandoned by me in some way. They felt unsafe with me. And I think it goes the other way, because they would yell at me and I would also feel very, very unsafe in the same way. So I think that what this calls for is creating some kind of family agreement about what's going to happen when things get close to the boiling point. Because once you're in the boiling point, trying to figure out how to manage doesn't work. So you want to basically have a plan, have a strategy that you can apply for those moments. Kids can be disrespectful. That's part of individuation. It's not a great part of it. It's not their best colors, but they do it. And so we want to know how we can respond. We want to have a way to respond in advance rather than trying to pull it out of the air in the moment. So I think that when kids are disrespectful, you can say anything from fresh as for vegetables to, we're going to take that stop right now. We're going to take that pause because this isn't going anywhere good. And, you can walk to a different part of the house and your child could literally follow you still screaming. I would close the door to I and other of my clients have closed the door to their bedroom and sat next to the door and had a child banging on it on the other side or yelling at them. That is, very uncomfortable, and you're setting a limit. But you're not going to teach anything about disrespect in those moments. They're just too far gone. So what we want to do is really be very clear about what limits you are going to set when things are highly activated or kids are basically just, in an amygdala hijacked and can't retract themselves. That's the most important thing. So have 1 or 2 phrases at your fingertips that you can say and 1 or 2 behavior options, and then do those. And with kids who are oppositional, with kids who are really in the middle of this, you can say, we have a choice here. This or this. Which is your choice? And they'll say, neither, I don't want to choose any of those. And you'll say the agreement that we have is you're going to choose this or this. And in the agreement, there's a non-cooperation clause. So you have something to fall back to. But you need to have a plan in advance. Trying to figure it out in the moment is not okay. You can't make your kids treat you with respect. You can treat them respectfully, and you can expect that they are going to push up against you as in part of the process of figuring out who they are. a great metaphor for this is someone once told me, which I love, which is, when elk come of age, I don't know if you've ever seen this, or deer come of age, they have, antlers. Males have these big racks, and they're covered with velvet. And the velvet has to come off the antlers. And in order to get the velvet off the antlers, they have to rub that antler up against a tree. And they can scratch the tree. They might tear some of the bark off, but they rub their antlers against that tree, and then they step back, and then they frolic with their other elk buddies, and they're the velvet's hanging down. They kind of like our pimply adolescents, and then they'll do it again, and the tree is steady. The tree is very clear. The tree doesn't, go up to them and pull the velvet off. The tree says, I'm here. I'm here. And this is what attachment theory teaches us. I'm here and I'm steady. And these are the limits of what I can do, and what I will tolerate. And these are the limits of what I won't. Very long answer, but I think it's important to go over that.
Whew, I'm feeling that one today, Sharon. That was good. That was good.
Literally, I said to myself when I was raising my teenage daughter, I'd be like, I am the tree. I may lose a limb in a lightning storm, but I am grounded. I am rooted. I am steady. Really, like, figure out what your phrase is that you can say to yourself, because somehow we have this invisible red button on our chest and no one sees it except our kids, and they come up and they push it and you're like, wah! Right? So we want to learn how to manage that.
So that leads to the question of, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. We had a follow-on question from someone who said, what would you suggest? They have a 6-year-old, so on the younger side, but a good amount of time to let pass before addressing the reflections and the solutions, and what, those options and what to do next time. How much simmering do we allow?
So with a 6-year-old, I would let a couple hours go by. Remember that the best times to talk to kids are when they're in the car with you, because they're trapped, and when you're maybe doing a project like cooking something together, and when they go to bed, because they're available. They want to connect. A lot of kids, that's the time when they sort of let their guard down, and they want to sort of talk to you or, connect or tell you their story or something. After dinner can be a good time as well, to sit down and have a short conversation. But you really need to have a couple hours happen between the act and for the recovery.
Okay. And another person wrote in to say that their 12-year-old will engage in conversation about solutions in those calm moments, but then in the moment of being triggered, she wrote, he doesn't want anything, doesn't want to use anything, blames everyone else. So you had suggested some tricks for parents, putting lists on your phones and things like that. Is there a similar trick we can use to help kids remember their own solutions in a way that doesn't further trigger them?
Well, I mean, lists are a good thing, and visual cues are so important for kids with ADHD. So that could go up on the fridge, that could go in their bedroom. There could be a wall of when they get it right. So, you could take some Post-its once a week and put them on a bulletin board and say, wow, I really liked when you blah, blah, blah. Or I noticed that you were able to pull yourself back from the edge here, so that they can have a sense of when they're getting it right. And then they can grow that. In the moment when they're dysregulated, they're having that overwhelm experience. They don't want to do anything because they're so overwhelmed. They want the overwhelm to sort of stop, and that overwhelm might be you or directed toward you. There's a way in which a lot of kids are angry at their parents or caring adults because they can't help the kids do the things that the kids can't do for themselves. Like there's some magical thinking that's involved. Like my parent really should be able to help me manage myself when I'm dysregulated, even though that there's no logical, framework for that. So, in the moment when they're dysregulated, I would say, look, we agreed when you get to this point, we're taking a time apart. So these are the choices we agreed to. They're up on the piece of paper. Do one of them, and we'll get back together in 30 minutes. This isn't working, and so that's where you have to really kind of draw the line, and that's hard. It's very hard, and it takes practice because your kids may not believe that you're actually going to follow through with what you say you are. They'll be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep pushing till she loses it, and then I'm good because I've succeeded in my export.
Yes. Yes. Now, quickly, I have to say, one of my favorite things about these webinars, aside from wonderful advice such as Sharon's, is some of the comments and pieces of advice from our users. And so I have to share a quote that someone added. I won't name them, but it made me laugh out loud. They wrote, "No one in the history of being told to calm down calmed down."
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Exactly.
It does lead to a question, and that is, when we are tempted to say, calm down, to a significant other or a child, are there alternatives to that we could try? Someone said, would it work to put it on you and say, I need to think for a minute?
I love that. That's actually where I was going, that you actually can say, this is getting too hot for me. I need to slow down for a minute and take a break and think. So I'm calling a time apart. So you as a parent or as a member of a couple can say, you know what, I need a little time to regroup. This is really, this is overwhelming, or this is really getting intense. And pull yourself out rather than expecting the other person to do that. And I think that works both with children and with other adults in our lives, because you're not saying you're out of control, dude, chill out. What you're saying is, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm going to need to take a little break right now. To pull myself back together. And this can happen in conversations. I don't know if you have this experience, but, sometimes my parents want to talk to me at the same time on my cell phone. And I'm like, wow, too much information. Like they talk over each other and they're talking to each other and then they're talking to me. And I'm like, whoa, can we just slow down? I really can only hear one person at a time.
Yes. I'm adding that to my personal list. I need a moment to simmer. Yeah. That's a good one. I'd like to turn a little bit to adults for a moment. We got a number of people who are basically maybe diagnosed later in life with ADHD, just coming to see emotional dysregulation clearly and having trouble forgiving themselves for past mistakes. It's a tough question, but you're very good at this stuff about self-forgiveness. Is there some advice or piece of wisdom you can offer for people who are having trouble moving forward with hope?
Yes. So first of all, what I want to say is I feel your pain. This is something that I have struggled with. I think though that there's shame about things that we've done in the past that we wish we hadn't. There might be a lot of judgment about towards ourselves and finger wagging, and what we don't really think about is that other people have done things like this too. Maybe they didn't do this exact thing that you did, but other people have had moments where they've hurt people that they've loved, consciously or unconsciously. And so what we want to do is to just say that we are an imperfect, perfect human. We're doing the best we can with the tools we have available to us in a given moment. And this is very important for you to say to yourself, I'm doing the best I can. I was doing the best I could in that moment with the tools I had available, and I didn't have any tools, so it wasn't something that was my finest hour. sometimes that happens. You know, in one of my favorite books, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day by Judith Fiores, which is a children's book, Alexander's having a very bad day. And he says, he's just having a very bad day. And he says throughout the book, like, I want to move to Australia, or I want to go to Australia. And at the end of the book, his mom says, some days are like this, even in Australia. And so we have to start to talk to ourselves with forgiveness. There's a wonderful Hawaiian meditation process called, and I can't say it from my life, so I'm so sorry, but I think it's called Ho'opono something, and which I've used many times from Insight Timer, but I still can't pronounce it. And it's about how you can forgive yourself for things that you've done. And, you know, part of the process is also asking for forgiveness, appropriately, you know, or being able to acknowledge that you made a mistake. I mean, one of the things that has helped me in my relationship with my daughter was for me to hear all the ways that they thought that I've hurt them, which were more than I thought, but whatever. And to say, and to acknowledge the consequences of that, to apologize, to change my behavior. That's been the thing that's made the most difference, because you can feel bad about what you've done and continue to do it. And then that apology doesn't really carry any weight. So start small, change something small about yourself, and that will help you towards forgiving yourself. We all make mistakes. It's part of living, and it's how we learn. Beating yourself up for the mistakes that you make doesn't teach you anything. The question that you want to ask is, what can I learn from what I did? How could I do it differently and maybe better next time?
What a wonderful way to cap off this very empowering session. Sharon, thank you so much for contributing all of your insight and advice to the ADDitude community. We really appreciate your contributions.
You're so welcome. And I hope that people will check out that free handout that we had displayed. And I know it'll be in the session note, the webinar notes. So thank you. And who knows, maybe there'll be a part 3 with more questions sometime in the future.
For now, for sure, if you didn't catch the handout, if you want to get the replay of this, we will put all those links in an email you will receive after the webinar wraps up. So do not worry. This will become podcast number 444. So if you are looking for it, that's the number. And we hope that those of you listening will join us. We have free webinars every week. And next week, we're welcoming Kristen Seymour on a related topic about how to teach executive function skills for independent living. So for those sort of teenagers and young adults. So we hope you will join us for that and stay up to date with all of what's going on at ADDitude by signing up for our newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. Thank you all for joining us. Sharon, thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.